I guess we'll start by taking a look at Roberto's life and upbringing, not that any of it really matters. And I just want to quick clarify that I have zero sympathy for this man. You don't get to murder, rob, assault, and attack people and then claim that you had a shitty childhood. Tons of people have shitty upbringings, but you don't see them kidnapping and assaulting people. It just smells like a giant steaming pile of hot caca for an excuse, and I'm not here to entertain it. But anyways, Roberto Jose Carmona was born in Buenos Aires province in 1963 to an unknown father and a woman named Magdalena Bonet. Now, Bonet didn't have the means to care for Roberto, so she left him at the Villa Elisa home in La Plata, which is kind of like a foster home. And how old he was at this time that she left him there, we're unsure, but what we do know is that he was younger than 7. While at this foster facility, Roberto suffered abuse from other children and authorities, enduring beatings and starvation. Soon after this, he was transferred to a convent when he continued to face physical mistreatment there as well. At the age of 7, Bonet came back for her son, but surprise, surprise, she began abandoning him yet again, and due to all of this, he began really resenting her. It wasn't until this time that he delved into substance abuse by using pot and popping pills. By age 10, he carried out his first robbery, stealing a .45 caliber pistol from a police car. Throughout his teenage years, Roberto was shuffled between various juvenile institutions. As an adult, he landed in prison multiple times for theft, serving time in prisons across different locations. In 1982, he received a 10-year sentence for aggravated robbery, kidnapping, and drug offenses, but he was granted parole on January 10th, 1986. Now, we're going to talk about one of his first major crimes that occurred just 4 days after he was granted this parole. On the evening of January 14th, 1986, Roberto was driving his Ford Taurus through Villa Carlos Paz when he noticed 3 young individuals on the side of Route 20. Among these 3 was 16-year-old Gabriela Seppi, and then she had 2 of her friends with her as well. And they were on their way back from a dance club, and they had a flat tire, and Roberto pulled over to lend them a hand and assisted in changing the tire. However, once the task was completed, he pulled a gun, robbed them of their possessions, and then proceeded to force Seppi into his vehicle before driving off. He drove for a while before pulling off to the side of the road to assault Seppi at gunpoint. Roberto then took her to Toledo, where he subjected her to another violent assault. Following this, he pushed Seppi from the car and then fatally shot her in the head. And then he just left her there to decay on the side of the road. He then headed towards Villa Maria, where he picked up hitchhikers Norberto and Sergio, falsely claiming to be an army corporal. So he's like, hey guys, I'll give you a lift. You can trust me. I'm in the army and blah, blah, blah. He picks them up, and as they're driving, he's slowly coercing them to help him commit another crime. He basically holds them hostage at gunpoint and says, you're either going to help me or else. So fearing for their lives, they agreed to help Roberto, and they drive for a while before stopping again. And this time, it was to rob 2 men that were fishing on the side of the road. We have no idea what they took from these poor fishermen, but what we do know is that their lives were spared. They were not killed or injured in any way. My best guess is that he either dropped them off at a random location or to the location where they were headed initially. The hitchhikers do eventually find their way to a police station where they reported their kidnapping and the robbery of the 2 fishermen. After Gabriela's friends reported her abduction and gave a description of Roberto, a manhunt was immediately issued. But Roberto wasn't arrested until February 11th, 1986. So this is now 28 days after Gabriela Seppi was murdered. He was caught after he had kidnapped a taxi driver and a small family just in order to rob them. He was put on trial and again was convicted, receiving a life sentence for murder plus 20 years for multiple counts of aggravated robbery and aggravated kidnapping. Now, let's fast forward to when Roberto was relocated to a facility called the San Martin Prison. And this is in Cordoba, Argentina. And this was where he would go to serve out those sentences. Even in the prison, the law was no match for Roberto, though, because his psychotic tendencies couldn't be contained. In 1988, he stabbed a fellow inmate named Martin Castro, claiming that Castro refused to share his wife for Roberto's own pleasure. Castro wouldn't allow Roberto to sleep with his wife, so Roberto shanks him, almost kills him. And then, just a few hours later, while Castro is sleeping, still trying to recover from just being stabbed, Roberto pours boiling hot water on him, hitting him directly in his face. And this would later permanently disfigure Castro for the rest of his life. Now, in this same prison, there was a man by the name of Hector Bolilla, who was a leader of a group of prisoners. Now, these were pretty bad dudes. They loved to fight. They loved to wreak havoc. Most of them were serving life sentences, so it's not like they had anything to lose. And one day, Roberto gets into it with these guys, and they had a fight. Well, a short time later, the group decided that they were going to try to kill Roberto by lynching him, but they were unsuccessful. Roberto then retaliated in 1994, I don't know a date, and fatally stabbed Hector to death. Although the specific murder weapon was never recovered, Carmona was convicted and received an additional 16-year prison sentence. Due to his violent tendencies, Carmona was transferred from the Chaco Regional Prison to a maximum security facility in Resistencia. However, his violent behavior persisted, and in 1997, he murdered another inmate named Demetrio by stabbing him in the chest with a sharpened broomstick. As a result of this and previous crimes, Carmona was sentenced to a life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Well, now we'll skip to 2011, and this is a crucial point in the story. This is when Roberto was deemed mentally unstable as a psychopath. He was observed by a psychologist inside the prison, and they claimed that Roberto lacked the ability to understand and share feelings of others who were in pain, and that he actively pursued killing people solely for his own enjoyment. But this is somehow overlooked because in 2014, he was granted temporary leave to visit a woman that he had met through love letters that they had been exchanging to and from the prison. They got married, and the prison allowed Roberto to visit his partner in Cordoba. He was granted leave every 4 months for 3 days at a time. The prison was under the assumption that his new wife was suffering from osteoarthritis and could not visit Roberto on her own, and that she also had a disabled son that she had to care for. So it wasn't like she could just leave her house and, go see Roberto at the prison. I just want to pause and say that it's utter bullshit that there wasn't more done to prevent Roberto from ever seeing daylight again. People want to talk about how our justice system is so terrible these days. It's always been terrible. It's just consistently been getting worse and worse, but it's never been great. So, at this time, Roberto Perverto, that's what I'm calling him, has been deemed a psychopath, and he now has 13 crimes he's been convicted of. So keep all of that in mind when I tell you this last part of the story, because you'll see why they immediately regret giving Roberto any sort of freedom. Now, let's fast forward to just a few years ago, on December 13th, 2022. Roberto made a daring escape from his partner's house, seizing the opportunity when the police and neighbors were busy watching the FIFA World Cup. According to the timeline of events, it was around 4:15 in the afternoon, right in the middle of the first half of the match, when Roberto informed the 6 prison guards that he had to urgently use the bathroom. Not sure if that was a number 1 or a number 2. I couldn't find that info. But the guards agreed, and he just walks right out of the house. Outside, he motioned for a cab, and the driver, a guy named Javier, would then be brutally murdered by Roberto with a series of vicious stabs to his neck, his chest, and his legs. He tragically ended Javier's life and then just scoots him over into the passenger seat. Roberto, now fleeing from the scene at a high speed, loses control of the car, resulting in a violent crash just 15 minutes later after all this has happened. But, undeterred by the wreckage, he quickly abandoned the scene and sought refuge in a nearby supermarket. There, he targeted an innocent couple, subjecting them to a terrifying assault before stealing their vehicle. He makes just 6 miles down the road before he abandons their car, and why he does that, I don't really know. Couldn't find any information on that. He then ends up in a clinic where he attempted to steal yet another car from a woman and her mom. However, when met with resistance from the mom, Roberto resorted to violence once again. He drew a knife and started slashing at the woman's hands. And all of this finally came to an end at 6:15 when Carmona was apprehended after an extensive manhunt. Remember, extensive again. When questioned about his motive for escape, Carmona simply replied, "I don't know. They painted me as the violent one." Around this time, COVID was still pretty rampant, which is another reason why it shocks me that they would grant him leave from the prison in the first place. So it took them a while before they would finally be able to give Robert his third life sentence in May of 2024 for the murder of the cab driver Javier. Roberto was then transferred to the Cruz del Eje prison, where hopefully he'll stay for the rest of his life. As for the 6 guards that were responsible for his supervision, they have since been detained and are being investigated for involvement in Roberto's crimes, as they should be. Well, guys, that's going to be it for today's story. You can tell me what you thought about it either in my Q&A on Spotify or in the comments section on YouTube. You may also email me any true crime story that you'd like told to my business email at morbidcases2024@gmail.com. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.